2.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Ruben and Jessie podcast. And today we have a really special, exciting, awesome guest who's going to do some exciting stuff with us today. So we're stoked for that. We have Keira on. How you doing, Keira?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good.
Amazing.
Good.
She's got some. If you're watching this on YouTube, she's got some dope art in the background. So highly recommend you go check that out when you get a chance. I was taking a bit of a deeper dive on your website earlier, and I noticed you do a lot of different things. These are all the different things that I'm especially nowadays, particularly interested in when it comes to like working with different dimensions, working with the quantum field, working with the Akashic Records and all these things. And so I am super excited to dive in there and dive into how these things started to emerge in your own life. Because I find people who find these things and understand these things fascinating. Because it's almost, at least in my own experience, it's almost like you always knew it. And it was just like, oh yeah, of course. But then you speak to some people and you're like, you sound fucking nuts. And I'm like, and it's like no judgment on them. I'm more just curious as to why doesn't it sound nuts to me? Like, why does this make perfect sense to me? And then for these people, it's like crazy. So I'd love to begin there. Wherever you want to begin on that front as to how these things started to come up. And when did you kind of take the pill and get out of the matrix or decide to dive deeper into it, whichever one it is?
Yeah, cool. Well, first I'll just say it seems so random, but I don't think it's an accident that we've connected, the three of us. And it's interesting to see, like, to use astrology, which is a more recent tool or maybe recent remembering for me, to see like how that shows up in each of our charts, which is interesting. But in terms of like, I guess the spiritual journey or how did I move? So I like my past life and this life was as a designer, which I'm still evolving to explore and see. Like it's like a super no. I don't want to keep doing just interior design or industrial design, product design, but I know it's going to play into my future. But so when I was in 2009, I went and did my master's in Spain, and part of the program we had 6 trips around Europe, but the first trip was like barely Europe, it was Istanbul. And I think now looking back, I can see, oh, that was like a spiritual initiation. And it's kind of not surprising because that place has so much ancient history and went in like the oldest, like probably the oldest buildings I have ever been in ever, other than caves, which aren't really buildings. And there was just so much, like, I think I didn't know in the moment, but we went on a boat tour of the Bosphorus and it rained and they had like the prayers. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Istanbul, but they had the prayers like playing on loudspeakers through the streets. I'm not sure how many times a day, but something about it was just so, like, I was not raised religious in any way. My mom is spiritual, but like nature spiritual and probably witch in hiding. And but I think that just started to wake up my intrigue of spirituality, not necessarily religion, but spirituality. And then because my mom has always been interested in nature, and it's interesting to see how my parents, like now also always like looking in retrospect, everything is like, oh, this makes so much sense. But my dad is always interested in not astrology, astronomy, I guess, like pointing to the stars, and he taught me how to look for constellations, and then my mom taught me how to garden. And so I just think, oh, it's so interesting that all along they were my spiritual teachers and I didn't know it. And then I came home from my master's back to Edmonton and actually went back to the same design job and was like this was so not for me. I took a yoga teacher training. And so I think that was really like to find that community and those teachers, people who were interested in teaching about yogic philosophy. So when I found yoga, which was in 2010, 11, that's where I like kind of realized I had this thirst for philosophy and spirituality, and it was quenched by all of the yogic teachings, not just the poses, but the teachings. And I didn't realize like how thirsty I was for this stuff. So that was where it began. Yeah. And then through this one yoga teacher I had, she did introduce me to the woman who taught me how to read Akashic Records. So yeah, I would say the yoga world is, my parents and the yoga world are number one intro into that journey.
And so as you started to dive into yogic philosophy, what began to uncover for you? Because, you know, Ruben and I have talked about this multiple times on the show for ourselves of like, and even now it continues to occur. We still come back and find new things about our childhood or new things about our own, the way we see the world. And, you know, we saw them through decades until a certain awakening happens. And then you're like, how did I not see this entire time? And so I'm just curious as to, you know, young Keira, when she's out there uncovering all these truths, what did you begin to see in your own life, in your own childhood, in your own, you know, raising, that you didn't see before? And what did that mean? How did that transform your identity?
Like looking back at how was that with me this whole time? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like as you started to evolve your paradigm, what began to strip away, I guess is a better way of saying it.
Yeah. I think like a love for wonder and magic and creativity. And I think the connection to the inner child is something super important to me, and something that I'll just always have with me. Not everyone is in touch with that, or maybe never will be. Maybe it's not part of their path, but so I think it's also like looking at my relationship to that part of me now, not even back in time. Yeah, and trying to think what else. Like, I think so. What comes to mind actually to talk about is like not what was there, but like what shut it down. You know, which was this world. That's another thing I feel like maybe we have in common is like I was not made for this world. I'm here to make a new world because this world makes no effing sense to me. Like, wait, you just taught us values and none of you guys are actually living your values, you know? Like, so, and there's always this question for me of like, okay, so kids are treated this way and like so beautiful and so innocent and so curious and creative. And where's this line where we stop giving people permission to be that way and all of a sudden they have to act their age, they have to be a grown up? And to me, it's actually so heartbreaking that's how many of us lose that creativity and imagination and innocence. And like, I think there's one thing of maturing, but there's another thing of maintaining your innocence. And I think I've always had part of that, and actually that's part of what has gotten me rejected or caused me to like hide, like people needing to be cool or needing to fit in. I'm observing that so much now. I'm like, oh, I thought that was like a junior high problem. That's a human problem. You know, like needing to fit in and not be yourself to survive, which even our ancestors for thousands of years have gone through, you know, denying who you are so you can survive. And then we're protected by our grandparents and our parents. Like, don't do that. That'll get you killed at the extreme, right? And it's like, or, you know, what if I fly?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what Ruben has to say about this, because I think this is something that's deeply important, like a deep topic for him, as far as this need for acceptance and this need for finding your own path. It's something he talks about a lot. And in my own in my own journey, most recently, like as you were saying it, I was like, yes, that's exactly the whole part of like keeping your innocence, because like you said, being creative and creating, manifesting things into your life requires so much of a fun, loving, and open energy, and it doesn't exist in linear time and space, and neither do kids. Like kids don't exist in linear time and space, right? They exist in whatever world they want to be in. And like that's not to say that adults should be kids, because that's a totally different thing. But the fact is, it's so true how we've allowed culture to dictate how our lives should run. And even as someone who's always experienced himself as a rebellious person, and has been like, fuck the system, you know, I'm going to do my own path. I'm going to, even in the idea of creating my own path, I then have created new boundaries as to what my own path would look like based on what alternative paths have looked like in the past, and have not allowed these other ideas or these other truths to create, allow me to create whatever life I really, really want, or allow that life to happen for me. And it's like you were saying, it is still uh, it's still a battle to really step into this new, like step into a place where you own these things versus like they're hiding in the background because only you believe them and everyone else thinks you're a fucking weirdo, and so you're just going to keep it here. And it's like it doesn't go into full effect until you are actually owning it and living it out into the world. And that's why I'm so fascinated by what it is you do, because I understand what that means to put it out there like that and actually talk about it and share these concepts, because it's not, majority of us aren't born in that world. This is all a whole new language, a whole new way of living, and to be out there and talking about it and saying like, hey, this is a real thing, that takes some balls. So I got you.
I got a big pair of cojones. No, actually, this is like part of my evolution is like, yeah, to put myself out there. It's scary. That's like one of the main things that hold me back is that. And I sometimes I even speak of it like the witch wound. Like it's not that long ago that for, I don't know, over 100 years, mostly women were killed for anything that wasn't, like for being in the forest, for carrying a note, for like lately it's been so passionate in me, like that wasn't a fairy tale. That really happened. That is our history. That's so fucked up. And like, I think there's like this remembering in me that like, yeah, there's like multiple past lives where I've been killed for just being me, just trying to heal people, just trying to, like, and so there is part of me, like, yeah, I have my website up, but there's still part of me that it's like, holy shit, yeah, what will people think? But then it's like, yeah, but everyone who's judging, are they really living as their true selves? Like, how much have they built walls around who they really are? Like this whole conversation in order to stay safe. And what are we losing? What are we compromising to fit in and to stay safe?
And it's just, it's that now that y'all talking about this is like bringing everything together. Cause I think back, like I have a little brother, for instance, and I look at like how he's growing up versus like how I grew up. So I didn't grow up during like the technological advances. I mean, we didn't have our first desktop until I was about 12 or 13 years old. So when I was a kid, I was playing with action figures. I was like creating little stories in my head. I had this insane curiosity and just like trying to like find these things. And now I look at like my little brother, for instance, and I'm like, oh, you're always on a tablet, you're playing some type of game while he's playing Minecraft, and that has its own like good parts to it, the creativity that can be built in that game. I'm just like, you're losing the aspect of like this reality that we live in. Like, well, what if you think this 3D reality? I'm gonna put it that way, because reality can be many things. But I look at that and I take my life, and after I've read books like Robert Greene's Mastery, and I think about like how most of what we do nowadays really stems from what we did as a kid. So are you a storyteller? Maybe that's because you were creating stories for majority of your life. Or when, you know, Tiger Woods, famously, his father put a golf club in his hands when he was 3 years old. So obviously he was going to become one of the best golfers out there in the world. And I always like go back, and I love that you're talking about that childhood curiosity, because it's like I think Paul Chek, who we had on the podcast, he has this whole saying is like, when did you stop? And Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong. It's like, when did you stop singing? When did you stop dancing? When did you stop? There's like 5 of them, aren't there, Jesse?
Yeah, it's basically it's like, when did you stop singing, dancing, painting, laughing? Like pretty much, when did you stop being an artist? When did you stop creating in the world? Because that's when you lost, basically you've lost your innocence, so you lost yourself.
Exactly. Thank you. So it's like we bring that in, and I always think about that, especially like in my life. I have a leadership position in my day job. You know, me and Jesse are doing this thing. We're kind of leaders in the space of holistic health, and we're like, when is it where I'm like too rigid, and I'm like, oh, I need to like put something in there, just like a little bit of color to like bring that curiosity and creativity and that beauty and that, you know, let me go outside. And I notice this when I'm going out for a walk and I'm looking around and I'm not seeing beauty in just the everyday. You know, I'm the one that when I'm hanging out with my partner or like current new friends, I'm the one that sees a hummingbird and is like, oh my God, look, a hummingbird. No one else does. And I'm like, where's your curiosity? Where's your like, you know, this fascination with life and this awe that exists within all of us? And I think, you know, when I notice I'm losing that, I'm like, oh, what do I need to do right now to get that back? And I love that you're bringing that up, that we all have these things that we forget because just life, you know, society, they throw everything at you. You need to be this way, you need to be that way, you need to look this way, you need to act this way. You can't showcase that specific thing you're doing. And the fact that you were even able to put your website up and show that courage, like, yeah, you might see it, but my people, the people that I'm looking for, are the ones that need to truly see this. And if you see it, you don't agree with it, cool. Like, that's not a problem. There's 7.8 billion people in the world. Like, you're just one out of the many. Like, you know, and that's something that's been coming up for me. Jesse, I don't know if it's been coming up for you, but just like, oh, no matter what I put out there, I just want to share more of who I am, because I feel like I've definitely over the last few years, and I'm getting older. So it's like every year, you know, being in my 30s, I'm like, I feel like I'm getting more rigid. And I'm like, no, you need to battle against that and push out versus then letting it cave in. And I just, you know, the fact that you talked about like putting up your website, being kind of scared still, but still doing it. I think that people need to hear that when they create their own thing or what they're passionate about and what they want to do, no matter how weird it may be, like they need to showcase that art. They need to showcase that creativity and whatever they do, so that the world can see, because there are people out there looking for it. And that's probably the greatest advice I ever got from like a random guy that I met many years ago. It was just do your thing, man. I was just like, huh, you gave me the permission I needed, you know?
There was something you brought up, Keira, that I'd love to go a little deeper in, about, you mentioned the witch wound, and that, you know, it's not that long ago that witches were being burned at the stake for what they were doing, and something that's been on my mind is, well, one, we had a whole podcast about ancestral trauma, and this book called It Didn't Start With You, how it was super impactful. But then also something I've been listening to on Gaia TV, which has been brought up a lot, is the fact that our DNA stores all of this planet's experience inside of us, so that we are a post-traumatic stress disordered race, of, you know, because of the cataclysms that have happened over centuries ago, and we're still living that out, and the witch hunts being one of them. So can you kind of go a little deeper into that and explain what's going on there, and for those who may be feeling as if like, hey, this is my truth too, and feeling that same type of fear, what are they actually going through? What is the underpinnings of that type of experience? why do people feel so afraid to go farther on these topics outside of just, oh well, because my friends don't think it's cool. What else, what deeper unconscious things could be going on there?
Well, I feel like that it's a big topic, and I've been observing these kind of things like rejection and in like the polarity of the politics of the pandemic and everything too. Like what happens when you have a different point of view? Like so commonly you're like immediately dismissed, and how cognitive dissonance is like stopping us from having real conversations. And but yeah, I haven't read that book. It didn't start with you, but I'm in line to get the ebook from the library, so I'm looking forward to that. And then so I would say, in addition to like ancestrally inheriting things and in our DNA from, I don't know if it's like the biosphere or how exactly that happens, but I would say energetically too. Like this isn't the same, but when I was in Spain, I could just, and this was before I really knew how intuitive I was, but I just felt like this place holds so much pain, and I can feel it and I can see it on people's faces still. And like, I just assumed like that's probably history. That's probably in the history. And then I think, so there's both like the energy that I think we do collectively receive, and people who are more sensitive, and I'm not sure if that's a gift or if it's just the people who are willing or predetermined to be more sensitive, or who haven't like put up walls to numb all of their feelings. Maybe those people feel it more, and if someone opened up to feel it, maybe they would feel it too. And I also think there's like the like past lives things. So one thing is, from what I know, most of my heritage is Northwestern European. So Norwegian, German, French, Irish, English, Scottish. So like I think there were probably witch hunts going on in all those places. So it's possible that like that energy of witnessing it, even if it wasn't participating, that is possibly in my DNA directly. And then I think there's also, I mean, not everyone believes in past lives, but and the thing is, even if you don't, what I perceive when I'm understanding a past life is like, well, maybe it's not my life, but if I'm receiving this information, I'm supposed to understand it, to have more compassion for what happened to someone at some point in the past or whenever. And I think we can even go beyond. I think past is the only thing that makes sense, because it's sort of like, well, we have a record that the past did happen. I mean, probably we can perceive the future and other paradigms the same way. It's just hard to really conceive of it because we don't understand it or don't know how to prove it the same way we know how to prove the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And also also if you look at just, for anyone who doesn't believe in past lives, you could even look at quantum entanglement and realize that like nothing is separate from one another. Everyone's experience is your experience. It waves out into you. That's why so many people are, right, especially in these times, are like having such intense contractions in their experience, because the collective consciousness is driving into them, into all of us. Ruben and I have had many conversations of just like getting lost in linear time about what's going on in the world instead of creating our own. So absolutely. But yeah, go ahead, continue.
Yeah. Oh, what was I gonna say? Also being empathic, I'm starting to ask myself, and still learning to discern, like, oh, perhaps this is coming up so strong for me because I can help heal it for the collective. Like perhaps this is not just my story. Perhaps this is how I'm meant to use my voice and use my gifts and tell the stories, because as a witness or as the audience, we learn something when we hear someone tell a story. So that's something I've been asking myself recently. Like, what if all these things that are coming up so strongly in me aren't directly mine? Like, what if I'm just meant to share it? And it's like, like I was saying to my sister-in-law, like basically, so two things I see really strong about this this year of pandemic is healthy boundaries, which has been a theme for like 2 or 3 years for me, maybe for the world. Like, oh, you can have healthy boundaries, you can set healthy boundaries. And then the other theme is just like that whole rejection thing, like cooties. Did you guys have cooties growing up, and like how immediately rejected you get if you have cooties? And now it's like, if you need to get tested for COVID immediately, so many people feel shame and don't want to tell anyone, because even if they probably got it from work, they don't want anyone from work to know. Or like, I know this is like a whole can of worms, but it's interesting to see how this childhood thing, like what I used to think were childhood games, it's like, yeah, these are all things we learned from unhealed adults. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You said something a bit before about, you know, people who are sensitive to these energies or these memories or these experiences, whether they choose to or it's predestined. What do you believe?
I think it's both. So like, if I were to pull astrology in a little bit, I think certain aspects like water signs, like lots of water in your chart, or certain placements of things could make you predestined. Or like, just like how, I don't know, I kind of believe that the order you were born in your family could, like, so what did you gave an example of something? Oh, Tiger Woods, Ruben, when you were saying like Tiger Woods' dad put a golf club in his hand at 3. Of course he was going to be a good golfer, but it's like, what if his dad doesn't even realize, but it was, he kept getting an intuitive hit, like, get this kid a golf club, get this kid a golf club. Like, wasn't it, what if it wasn't his dad? What if it was his destiny and he would have gotten a golf club sometime or other, no matter what, you know? So yeah, I'm like, sometimes I talk in circles, so I don't know if I answered the whole question, but yeah, I think it's both. I think it's both.
Do you think, because this is also something that has been coming up for me more recently, as I recognize that, like, identity has been, I mean, I think identity has been a big thing for a long time, but I think especially in the year of 2020 and even 2021, we've all had to reconcile with our values and what we identify as and what we, because now everything is your identity. Any belief system you have, any choice you make, whether you put on a mask or you don't put on a mask, whether you're white or you're black, whether you're this or you're that, like, whether what country you're from, what political party you're from, like, everything is in your face around identity. And what was funny was, at the top of all of this going down, I think I was very much locked into deciding what I was. Like, I'm going to be this person. I'm a moderate. I am this. I am that. I am whatever. And as I started to really, since December, start going deeper into understanding different dimensions, or understanding like different forms of spirituality that I didn't explore in the past, it's almost like I'm starting to get to a point where I don't even know what to identify as it, like, other than like art. Like, I can use archetypes to help explain or navigate in situations, but me as Jessie, it's like, unless I look in a mirror, I don't really fucking know what I am. Because, and it, also when you look at the science of it, is like, what are we even, you know, like, there is no us. Cells pick up our identity from frequencies outside of ourselves. So what is us? And I'm curious to understand, because you like, I heard you say something along the lines of like, is this my energy? Is this my belief? Is this my concern? Or is this something that is being channeled through me or coming through me to be shared or expressed in some way? And I'm really curious how you begin to navigate, or allowing the world to like breathe through you, not to be all poetic, but like, instead of concretely being, this is Keira, this is who I am, how do you allow yourself to free yourself of that, so you can have the world come through you and share faster, I would say, or with better clarity?
I love that question. And also when you're saying you don't even know who you are, like part of me or like the spiritual guide is like, yes, like that's it. Like also, and this I think was something we had in common is when I looked at your chart, you do have a strong Neptune placement. Even I don't remember if you have Pisces, but you have a strong Neptune placement, and so do I. And that was another thing I was going to bring up is we're in Pisces season and we just had a new moon. So the moon is the same sign as the sun when it's a new moon. So moon, I don't think it's in Pisces anymore, but it just was. So we're like completely Neptune influenced, which is awesome. And Neptune is like the great dissolver. So, and then like, I mean, there's all the archetypes, like Pluto plays into it too. I would say Pluto would come in like every time you like define something, it's gonna be like, oh yeah, oh yeah, you think you're this? Like, let's just test you and show you that you could be completely the opposite. But the question about did you say how do I open myself to be like that channel? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Like how do you let go of whatever attachments to your identity that you've had to allow for new versions of you to come through?
A lot of ego deaths. Yeah, work shitty jobs. I'm living in my parents' basement right now, so it's like, just let your ego die. Like honestly, I've said this to other people, but it's like, oh, that's my medicine. It's like, go to bed every night and let your ego die. Like, and I think that's why I'm like looking at the world like, whoa, like all these people are living motivated with ego, and that's pain. Like we're so afraid of the unfamiliar that we're not willing to risk something and shed like that struggle, that because what is it like, the devil is better than
The devil you know
don't
is better
know.
than the devil you don't know.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't have to be a devil, but like yeah. And I'm trying to think, I mean maybe that's part of my destiny, is this, to be that channel, because that's something, like if you look on my website, the about me page, it's like, whoa, what is she not, in a way, like I'm like, don't put me in a box, don't you dare put me in a box, like I don't want to be put in a box. So it might be partly just who I am, but in terms of other people wanting to be that open receptive channel, I would say my brain is like, get high. Like high on life, or like it's funny because I keep thinking in contrast, but like look at like what would keep you from being open, or what are your fears around receiving, and work through those in order to be more open and more, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about what are your fears around receiving? Can you jam on that a little bit? Like what is receiving, and why would people have fears around that?
Sure. Yeah, and some of it, I think attachment to logic and analysis is fear that likes to disguise itself really well as, I'm practical, I'm this, I'm logical, I'm making a sound decision. And so the fear there is like trust. Oh, that's another thing that popped into my mind. Like before we started, I was sitting. I wouldn't say quite meditating, but it was like, where would the world be if no one had trust issues? Where would we be? How would we behave? How would we treat each other? What would we do in our lives? What would we choose to do? What risks would we take? And I think trust, like lack of trust in ourselves and in the unseen, is part of the fear of receiving. And then yeah, I think there's this fear of rejection. Like, what if I'll be rejected? Because that's one way, like in one school of thought that I've learned from, all of our fears all come down to this one ultimate fear. And maybe you guys have read on things similar, but this one ultimate fear of annihilation. Like, what if I'm nothing? What if I'm meaningless? What if I don't exist? What if I dissolve? But in my mind, I just go straight to like spiritual, like, but I'm everything, and I am the universe, and I'm you, and you're me, and I'm stars. And so like as soon as I say this, the universe will probably test me. But it's like I'm not so attached to like needing to be me. So I mean, like I have like this soul push that wants to go in a certain direction, but I also have this trust. So like it's all part, like all the drops of water are of the ocean, or all the pieces of the puzzle are the puzzle. Yeah.
You brought up something that made me like remember, and I know Jessie, and I brought it up on the podcast several times, but when Jessie and I, like 3 years ago, for folks who have heard this, I'll say this as quickly as possible. We went on an immense trip and went, took, some psychedelic mushrooms and blasted off into space. Not all of us, but me specifically. And Jesse is laughing because he knows, but I was the only one just knocked on my ass for the whole 5-hour journey. I think I got up maybe twice. And what I found actually, or at least what I was going through, was that exact thing. Because one of my biggest fears my whole life was death. Like, we don't know what happens after. We don't know what's going on. And that's kind of been like what's led my curiosity, is kind of figuring out, like, what is that? What is fear? Well, the core amount of fear is like, you're going to die when you do this. And what it showed me was that, like, annihilation. What if you were nothing? What if you didn't matter anymore? What if this? And I was like, you're all alone. You're in this. And it was just it was forcing me there. As much as I didn't want to, you have no choice when you're on the journey. It will take you there. And it did. It took me to that point, and I had to pretty much, before moving on to the next phase, I guess, it was like, you need to accept this. As much as I tried to run, I was like, nope, we're here. Like, you're annihilated. You're done. What happened? What are you going to do? Like, look, no one's here with you. I remember that was the second time I got up and no one was in the house. I remember all you guys went out for a walk and I was alone. I was like, what if this was eternity? You were stuck in this house. And I remember just looking out and just being like sad for, like, I don't know. I didn't understand linear time during that. So, but I was very sad for a short stint and then just dissipated. And you would just like come to a conclusion of like, this is what it is. And that's all I can say. And just had to like accept it and move on. And once I did that, it was like, okay, you can go back. We're going to take you to the next journey. And then it was showing me all the pretty lights and the holograms and all. It was really fun after that, but it definitely brought me to some deep, dark places that was just like, is this death? And it was just like, and what you were just explaining about annihilation, I think that's what it was. Because it was like, oh, you're nothing. You don't matter. You're nothing. This is all. You're stuck in this house forever. No one knows. You're done. And I was just like, so I appreciate that you talked about that, because I definitely felt that. And the only thing I was able to do was just accept that that's what it was, accept that the fear exists and that possibly exists, that reality or that dimension does exist, but it's like, but that's not where you need to be. And that's what I got at the end when I finally came back to 3D reality. I was able to say, like, appreciate what you have here, your friends, your family. I mean, the first person I called was my mom, obviously, like the great mother. And I was able to just say, like, oh, like I have all this, it's still here. And it really just brought me back to like appreciate this moment all the time, because you never know. But yeah, it sounds cheesy for most people. I know some folks have already heard that, but it's just that annihilation. It was just like, oh yeah, I've been through that. I went through that for however long it lasted.
Yeah,
So-
and if you hadn't, like, perhaps there would have been ways to resist it the whole trip, and you'd still be living with that fear. Like that was part of your consciousness that agreed to like finally let go. And then, because I think many of us walk around with that fear until we can like really be held enough to surrender or not, or die, or like actually die. Some of us may go to our deathbeds with that fear.
It's so funny that you use that word held, because more and more as I work, like as I allow, like you said, receive in the world, the more I could feel as if I'm being held by the universe. Again, not for poetic reasons. Like it literally starts, I start to, it almost feels like a cellular experience where I start to feel like space becomes physical to me. And I start to feel as if I have space, like space is, I'm in the womb of space constantly. And it's almost like it's directing my life experience. And I'm just supposed to be like a still ass tree and allowing life to do its thing. And the more I become sensitive to that. And it's true, because I remember, in my own family, there's a deep history of depression, anxiety, PTSD. My parents ran away from Soviet Russia in the 90s. And so there's a lot of that, of not trust, fear. And I grew up in that so much that until I read that book, It Didn't Start With You, I didn't realize how afraid I was of everything, like of the world. And I was in total incoherence of the world. So I totally resonate with that terminology. And something that just came up as we were talking about these things that I'm just curious from your perspective as someone who explores these ideas is how do you from this place cultivate relationships in your life, whether they're romantic relationships or friendships or anything. How do you approach them? What do relationships mean to you, and how do you move through them?
That's super interesting. Oh, yeah. Also, I want to come back to what you said about a still ass tree, but in regards to relationships.
Because that's something I've noticed, again, like this is all new to me too. Like, I mean, this is all new to me. And so like these things are all top of mind as I'm changing. And one of the biggest things is changes in relationships. Like the way I approach people in my life is very different now and starting to become more and more different. And like any expectations or rules, like rules of engagement that I've had in the past are like dissipating completely. And I'm just curious to understand how you navigate that, whether with people who are, on the same playing field as you and understand these things, or even more so those who aren't. And you're just being you, and you're bringing that, your authenticity and your wisdom to that relationship, and just how you've been able to navigate and open up, one, allow for the other person to have their experience, but also, expose them to your own world, or different world. I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's oof. Well, it's interesting because I've had like some relationships fall away or even fall apart in the last few years. And so actually, astrologically, Pluto has been dancing back and forth past my ascendant, which is how you show up in the world, like how you appear in the world. And because it's been retrograde, this has been like 3 years, and I just saw something earlier today that was like, Pluto's going retrograde. I'm like, no, like I thought it was leaving. But anyways, so I think it's like discerning based on feeling and values, and this has been like a huge learning journey for me, because like the reason it's such a big question for me is because I'm still in it and I'm still learning. So I like through this pandemic, I saw like, just because I took this role of like the hermit and observing and just observing so everyone and their motive, like questioning what could that person's motive be, what's that person's motive, and like what are my wounds, like kind of also like went into the cave to like lick my wounds, because I can see now I was sort of, well, I realize I'm codependent basically, and I think part of that is because I'm empathic, and part of it is because that was my coping mechanism from childhood. Like, be the good girl, because that's how you get people to like you. And so now, as I have started creating boundaries and being more like in my center and knowing that I can have a different opinion and that's okay, and people might agree and that's okay. So yeah, I've been like in the heart of that and still learning, like, how do I, like, there's still this fear in me of like, how do I be myself and not offend other people? And it's like, Keira, like, people are going to be offended. Like, you can't live your life. You can't live your life. Not to like, I'm not going to purposely go out and offend people. But, you know, sometimes I'm like, maybe that's my purpose, right? What, like, why am I even questioning that? Me being me could trigger people, but that could be the catalyst for them to like, whoa, like, why did that trigger me so much? Like, why did her like living an alternate way of life, or not taking a conventional job, or not being a mother, or yeah. But I think so much my intuition is what guides my relationships, and my gut and my heart. And like, if there's no spark of magic or intrigue, then I'll be kind to someone, but I won't like pursue the relationship. You know? So like how I found you was like completely random, and I'm like, well, this must have been meant to happen, because I'm not sure why you showed up on my YouTube feed. And you know, it was just like, and then so I think it's trust. I mean, not everyone lives that way, but for me it's like trust and look for signs. Like, some people might say, oh, that sounds so cheesy. Like, yeah, well, it works for me. Like, that was a clear sign when you had that picture of Hilma F. Clint art on the front of that book, and I was like, well, whatever this is, I'm supposed to see it. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think something that a theme that keeps being reiterated is like to let go of the logical mind. And like you said, some people make decisions logically, or assume that they're making decisions logically, and attempt to do it. And everything that you've been saying up to this point is like, can be also said in the way of like, listen to your heart, listen to your gut, you know, and tap into something that's much stronger than your mind, which is your heart, or your intuition, which can really only be cultivated but through practice. So I really love, what you're talking about. And you've mentioned it many times, and so I think this is a great place to begin. So we have a special edition second half of this episode, where Keira, who is I'll let you explain your relationship with astrology yourself, but is a explorer of this, a seeker of this, and obviously has an understanding of it. We met because she commented on one of the YouTube videos, and we just hit it off. We started talking, and she was kind enough to show me my chart, especially at a time where things were changing very rapidly in my life. And it was an awesome opportunity to have you do that, because it just gave me reassurance. Oh yeah, then everything I'm doing right now makes total fucking sense, at least from that perspective. And so Keira is going to take a look at my chart in accordance with Rubens chart, and show us what, who we are, how are we aligned in the stars together? What does this mean for our relationship? And right before we jump into that, if you could explain a little bit about what astrology is, because I think for the most part, most people would just be like, oh yeah, I'm a Taurus, I'm a Cancer, I'm a this, I'm a that, and that's like as far as it goes. And then there's obviously all the skeptics out there as well. So if you could maybe explain a little bit about why astrology is what it is, why is it, how can it be accurate? Like, what gives it the reason to be accurate? And what is our relationship with the stars, that they impact us so much depending on where they are in space?
Okay. That feels like a lot of questions. Astrology. So your chart, your natal chart is like a map or a blueprint of what the sky looked like at the moment you were born, the place you were born. So, I mean, it's not a photo of the sky, but that's kind of, you learn how to read it, and that's what it's based on. So you need to know your birth time and the place on the earth where you were born, because the angles of the moon, the sun, the planets, the asteroids changes based on where on the planet you're born. So I always have been somewhat interested, like since childhood, but never followed it too deeply. And then one of my yoga teachers became an astrologer, and I loved what she was teaching. And I think with my mind and my experience, it's kind of like the blend of like that practical pattern viewing scientific designer person who's creative, blended with the intuitive side of me. So I love learning and understanding, how does this map work, and then how can we read it, and then how can we read it from like actual, like out of the textbook, and then also I go a level further of like, and what else is coming to me intuitively. So my teacher also works with a woman who does mythological astrology. So her teachings of the myths of each of the planets, the sun, the moon, the asteroids, that has also been super inspiring for me. And sort of like, we learn through story and through relationship. So all these bodies in the sky actually are in relationship with one another, and we are on a body in the sky in relationship with all those bodies, you know. And if we zoom out, our solar system is spiraling around a greater solar system. So I mean, technically we have a relationship with everything, but there are some major ones, like the planets closer to the sun and the earth are personal planets, and then the ones further away are more like generational planets, but they all influence us. And there's so much humans have already studied into and created this whole scaffolding of what astrology is. I don't know the actual origins, but then like part of me is like the Akashic record reader part of me is thinking, well, yeah, this has just always been, we've always been in relationship with the stars. Like even before sailors started sailing and navigating, like let's say you lived on a different star in a past life, or let's say you lived in a time like, or let's just say the first humans or the first tree, like we're just in relationship with all of it. And I wanted to go back to that still last tree thing you were talking about, and like feeling space, because Akash means space in Sanskrit. And the way I relate is that I say there's like this web, like we have the elements, right? And it's easier to perceive earth, air, fire, water. But to me also space is like this web, and we do move through it. But I really love what you said about like, maybe we just stay still and like life, we let life flow past us. And I don't know if that's more like a Shiva masculine thing, or if that's how we're all meant to move through life. It also made me think of Donnie Darko. Have you seen that movie? You gotta see it. It's so good. It's older.
What is it called?
Donnie Darko with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, there's like these like destiny lines, like kind of like an aura, but from the solar plexus that like moves and kind of like guides his path. So it was a cool visual representation of what if that's how we're really moving through the world, if we were to perceive that. But back to astrology. so probably the only people that would have the exact same chart is if you were born at the exact same time in the exact same latitude and longitude as someone. But then there's other factors like your DNA and life experience. Okay. So I'm wondering if I should share one chart and then the other, and then them combined. Do you want me to do that?
Hey, you're the master here. You do what you need to do.
All right. Let's see.
Here
All
we
right.
are.
Here we are. So this is Rubens Chart.
That's crazy. It looks
And Jesse,
wild.
yeah, like Jesse's seen his own. Yeah, when every chart is so interesting because they're all so unique. And when I saw this, I was like, whoa, like, whoa, so many oppositions. That's what these red lines are that go straight across the chart. So Ruben, you have an absolute stellium in Capricorn. So that means you're uber Capricorn.
Oh, that's what I've been told that. So definitely.
Yeah.
And folks, for the folks listening, I highly recommend going to our YouTube channel and watching it there so you can see the graph. Because I can't even explain this. So Keira, you'll have to do the honors of explaining.
Yes. Yeah, I'm actually creating a course, Intro to Astro, how to read your chart, because I think if you've never even seen one, it's like, I'm interested, but I have no idea where to begin. So if you're not watching, there's a circular wheel with 12 different pies, and they're represented by the 12 signs. And depending on what time someone's born, that changes their rising sign. So Ruben, you are Cancer rising. So you show up first in the world. Like people, when they first perceive you, you would be Cancer, which is to your advantage because that's like, I mean, anything can be to your advantage, but it's the opposite of Capricorn. So you have this balance built into you, that the direct opposite signs across the chart, whichever ones, bring each other balance. So usually whatever Cancer might be lacking, they would add Capricorn and vice versa. And the cool thing is I'm a Capricorn rising, and that's been coming up for me a lot, is like connecting with people who have a 180-degree turn of the wheel. So my Capricorn is over here and yours is directly opposite, but that means in my experience so far, like these people can reflect and like understand each other from polarities, which is interesting. But I think like Jessie, when I saw your chart, what I said was like, I get the feeling your life is learning in cycles. And Ruben, I would say, if I were just to generalize, it's like you learn in opposites or in balance, or balancing opposites, just from seeing these lines. But I'll just show you Jessie's chart, just so you can see that they're all different. Okay.
Hasn't shown up yet.
So
Here we go. Wow, Jessie.
There we go. They're just like Ruben, your chart is it looks so simple because everything's clumped together. Yeah. And I put in extra things.
I'm complex, yo.
You're complex. You're well balanced. You got like the triangle. You got some half squares going on. So you're Aquarius rising, which you know, but it's interesting because that centaur, well, right? I was intrigued by the centaur mythology or symbology, and that is Chiron is represented in mythology as a centaur, and that's like playing a peak role in your chart, which is interesting. And then we can go back to the single chart, but I'll show you what it's like when your guys' charts are overlapped. So.
Oh, that's so cool. All right, folks. So she's currently about to synergize. No, that's not the word. Put our charts together. Rubens and Jessie coming as one. Oh, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah. So what I see first is this blue rectangle that's being created.
Oh, wow.
So blue lines are favorable. The longer ones are called trines because they're like a third of the way around the wheel, and the shorter ones are sextiles because they're a sixth of the way around the wheel. So who's on the inside? Jessie's on the inside. So Jessie's Mercury, which is like the god of communication, has a favorable aspect to Ruben's Jupiter, which is like the expander and could be like the spiritual teacher. And then there's another trine over to Jessie's moon. So that's like your intuition, your feelings, your sensitivity. And then your you guys have your moons sextile, which is favorable. So it's like you probably understand each other on a sensing and intuiting level. And then, yeah, and then all that is, so Jessie's Mercury is also trine. Ruben, you've got like all these things so close together in Capricorn. So you have, this is like a major aspect in your chart. Your sun and your moon and Uranus, this is Uranus, moon, sun, are conjunct. So they're all together. So that's why there's like 3 blue lines. So, and they're all in a favorable aspect to Jessie's communicator. So yeah, like when you guys say, yeah, we have these long conversations, that's not surprising because you have these favorable aspects to like spirituality, expansiveness, communication, and then like your sensitivities and how you show up in the world. So that's cool. You also have, so this symbol is not as major, but they're like exactly conjunct. Ruben's Venus conjunct Jessie's Pallas Athena. So in Aquarius. So that's, so they're both feminine energies. So it could be like your creative side, like your fun. Venus is like pleasure, money, beauty, and Athena is like creativity and also the goddess of war, but not in the same way that Mars would be. She like makes her plans and only does what's necessary. Like in my view, I would say, yeah, that would be like a sustainable version of a warrior instead of like, let's just run into battle. So that's interesting because they're so exactly connected. And then there's another one I saw that was pretty, oh yeah, this. So Jessie's ascendant is conjunct Ruben's true node or north node. So that's super favorable because your ascendant is like, so the big 3 in astrology, like if you only know your sun sign, like that's probably the sign you would read in the newspaper astrology or whatever, right? But the other 2 that like would help you understand yourself the most are your AC, the ascendant, and the moon sign. So ascendant is like how you show up in the world and your persona, but there's also the moon sign is like who you are when you're comfortable or when you're at home alone or with your closest friends. So it's also who you are, but so the true node is where your soul is heading, and opposite the true or the north node, it's not showing on the chart, but directly opposite it is your south node, and that's kind of where you come from in your past, like your history. And so I would say how Jessie shows up in the world maybe kind of inspires you, Ruben, like towards where you're headed. Not to say one of you has to be ahead of the other, but it's like just like your way of being, maybe Jessie, is like spark something for Ruben of, oh yeah, like I'm totally on that path. I think my mom's something like her son or something lines up with my true node. My son shines on my nephew's true node, and I can see that like the role I play in his life. It's like I'm reminding him because he's very ethereal, artistic, and artsy, and I think I kind of play that role of like the magic auntie that some people can't always get from their parents. But so this is like the true node is like a soul connection. So if you have something big like that connected, it's like, oh yeah, you like maybe you felt like you guys knew each other as soon as you met, that kind of thing.
That's so true.
Yeah.
We did. We just became bros immediately. Funny enough, and I've told Jessie like the whole idea, like the way he shows up in the world in terms of taking risk and never being afraid to go for the next thing, no matter how much he has to sacrifice, is like something I aspire to, because I'm more of like, I'm willing to be, content and comfortable, and just like I'm willing to go that route more often, but having like Jessie in my life to be that constant reminder of like, hey, where's that next risk coming from? And like, are you gonna go there? no matter what it takes. So it's like it's that constant reminder. So it's very funny that you brought that up, because I've told Jessie that before.
I mean, I
I like-
definitely will bring chaos into Ruben's life on
100%.
a bi-weekly basis. I'm like, yo, Ruben, listen, we gotta.
Yeah, but it's
Like,
like
yeah.
now you're like the dad putting the golf club in Tiger's hands, like some, you know, not that you, I'm like, it doesn't have to be a hierarchy, but that's sort of just the energy. Do you guys know
what you said before about like my was it that my spiritual energy is connected to his teacher energy? Was that it, or what was it down below on the chart? Something about
yeah, your communicator is connected to his spiritual expansive.
Yeah, I mean, that's like what I go to Ruben for, probably always, is like, how do I better communicate certain ideas, or like if I'm having trouble in relationships, for example, like Ruben's the guy I go to be like, hey man, like how do I handle this situation? How do I better express myself here? Or like I'm having trouble even articulating to myself about certain things, and Ruben will support me in like breaking that down and like understanding how to express myself there. So absolutely, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, awesome. And then you have that connected to his Jupiter, and also Sun, Moon, and Uranus. And these, so I was trying to get it all straight before. So Pluto, no, not Pluto. Uranus is like the great grandfather, and he is the father to Jupiter, who was the father. Oh wait, he was Saturn or Jupiter, and then Mars. So it's like all these masculine, not that it has to be men necessarily, but all these masculine archetypes. And just to focus on Ruben's chart, and maybe I'll even go back just to his chart for a minute, just so it's easier to see. And then that can help you understand how, Jessie, your like aspects to those three pieces in his chart, what they mean a little more. So, all right. So if you look at these numbers, that's the degree. So you can see these three blue lines. So 4 degrees, 5 degrees, and 6 degrees. So this is like a near exact conjunction of the sun and the moon, which are massive influencers in your chart. And then nestled right in between them is Uranus, which is like, this is interesting because I was kind of intuitively feeling into, okay, like who is Ruben? Like what will his chart be? What will his birthday be? And I think I watched one of your guys' podcasts and saw some IG stories or something. And I was like, I feel like there's some fire, but you don't have like a strong fire sign, except for this, which I'll show you in a minute. But Uranus is represented as the lightning bolt, which is made of fire. And he's like the shit disturber, but he's like the great grandfather wizard. Like what I think of is like Gandalf, like, you shall not pass.
That famous scene, yes.
And also he's like the master of change, which can show up as what's the word, when you do things quick, impulse. It can kind of show up in human life as impulse, but I'm curious to know, like, is that something in your life? Like, do you change a lot, or like, does your mood change, or does your life change, or because it's your sun and your moon, so it's like how you shine, how you show up in the world, and also like how you show up internally for yourself and your feelings.
Is that for me or Jessie?
Yeah, that's for you, Ruben.
Yeah, so I would say over the last 10 years, the Ruben that was like 20, 24, like there's been so many different like Rubens. So I definitely connect with that, because like, I mean, Jesse's known me for about 4 years now. If I
Which
do
is
the math
crazy to
correctly.
think about.
I know. It's like 4 years. I think like when he met me compared to where I am now, I mean, he can tell you like the amount of shifts and changes, because it's like, once again, like you know, he aspires me to continue like this movement and not get content, but also like that comes back, and I'm like, I can't stay the same, and whoever stays the same around me will just get, you know, I guess the thunderbolt, right? Like moving beyond them, because I'm like constantly changing. I'm like, can you keep up? And it's like,
I would also say like your appreciation for travel is, I would assume that plays a role. Like the fact that you enjoy being in having new experiences, being in new environments so often. Because like me, that's not like I can't relate to that at all, in the sense that I'm very much like as far as like my living situation or my experience situation, I keep it local, you know, that's my for the most part, that's my thing. But like Ruben loves to travel, you know, he loves to go around and experience new things. So I would say, yeah, change is definitely something he enjoys. And I feel like you learn like, at least from my conversations with you, a lot of where your spiritual work happens is in travel. Like when you travel, it's a deeply spiritual experience for you.
100%.
Whereas for me, it's very like, for me, I'm like, I could just be in my bedroom and travel to different, you know, universes in my head, you know. So
Astral travel.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is funny because this is all happening in Capricorn, which is an earth sign, but to have Uranus here, so Capricorn is a few things. It's like goals and aspirations and career, and it's also structure. It's naturally ruled by Saturn, but to have Uranus there, or Uranus, however you want to say it, it's like that. It kind of comes back. I don't know. The intuitive feeling I get is like how we all relate is this sort of new Earth thing. Have you guys heard of the concept?
Yeah.
So it's like you're here to lay the blueprint of a new structure. So in this sign that has historically been so connected to like the old structures, when you put Uranus in there at home with your sun and your moon, it's like, yeah, structure, but not this structure. And maybe that's me projecting because that's how I want the world to be. But that's what I
Not at all. That's exactly what I'm doing, because it's like I never liked the old way. Once Jessie mentioned like rebellious, like I was extremely rebellious growing up. Like, you know, in my relationship, I've been like, I don't want to do the same thing that everyone else does, because obviously it's not working when you look at the statistics and the data. And I'm like, no, let's do something new. Same thing with my friendships, same thing with like the American ideal that everyone has: get a house, 2 kids, yada yada. I'm just like, no, I want to have a community and live with a bunch of people actually, where we all take care of each other's kids. Like, you know, like just change the paradigm completely and throw a wrench in things, because I think it's just the way to go moving forward, and then create structure there.
yeah, exactly. And it's also all of this this is like a profound stellium. Stellium is when you have like 3 to 5 or more things. So you have Moon, Uranus, Sun, Neptune, Saturn, and Mercury all in this sign, and those are all like big players. And this is the 7th house. So there's 12 signs. There's also 12 houses, and they're always numbered in the same place. So the ascendant is determined by your birth time, and the first house is always here. Every house stays the same, but the wheel rotates depending on your birth time. So this place where your stellium is in the 7th house, which is naturally ruled by Libra. So you might also have some tendency to balance and harmony. And then
I literally got a shirt that says peacemaker. And when I read a book about wolves and learned about beta wolves, and guess what the beta wolves do? They're the peacemakers of the pack. And I cried when I read that, because I was like, that is me. Like, that's how I always feel. I'm always in the middle, being like, you know, red, blue. Nah, man, we gotta mix them together. Where red, blue makes purple. Like, let's do it. So I definitely feel that.
And it's also all in the house of relationships. So I feel like so much of your life experience probably happens in regards to how you relate to other people. And this is like, I mean, it's kind of true for everyone, but it's like insanely true for you. So So if we go back, so wait, before we go back to together, I'll just show you these favorable aspects you have. So the blue lines are both meeting at Pluto, which is the god of destruction, death, rebirth, transformation. But then it's like, yeah, you could get scared, but it also means I'm willing to show up for the shadow work and like go on the journey, you know? And so you have Pluto sextile, let's just scroll down and see. Saturn and Neptune. So I'd have to look that up. You can Google even just like each aspect, like Pluto sextile Saturn, Pluto sextile Neptune. But so I would say it's like a favorable aspect between change. So Pluto also represents change or rebirth and death, and your creativity, your imagination, your vision, and also that's Neptune, and Saturn is like your structure, your integrity. And then this other blue line, the favorable aspect, Pluto trine Chiron, which is the wounded healer. So that's like I would say the number one asteroid you want to look up in your chart. From my point of view, and maybe from modern astrology, it's like a big indicator, especially if you are in the world of like helping people live a better life or heal or whatever. So you have a favorable aspect between Pluto and Chiron. So it's like, and so Chiron is in your first house, which means there may be or have been some aspect of woundedness right at the core of your identity. But if you can, like, basically what Chiron is the alchemist who takes his wound and turns it into his medicine. And yeah, so trying to think like how to like completely read that. And then it's also opposite your like all these things in Capricorn, like everything. But so there's like challenge and harmony there. So if you don't allow yourself to respect and embrace change, I think that is where there would be more challenge, if that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of a universal teaching, but
a little extra on this end of things. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then back to like I think it was what Jessie was saying about like, what am I? I'm everything, I'm nothing kind of thing. That's actually a really Neptunian thing to say, but also to point out you're not lacking in any of these places. It's just that we can learn a lot from the placement of where certain things are. So we are made up of everything, but there's just like stronger points of focus in certain places. So I'll go back to do you want to look at just Jessie's chart for a sec, actually?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
because Jesse's chart is wild, folks. You need to see this. Please check the YouTube. His lines are everywhere, but he has a huge giant triangle. Like that blue triangle that he has is huge.
Yeah, that's called a grand trine. And then it's actually like could be almost 2 triangles.
Oh wow.
And then if he like interacted, Jessica, if you interacted with anyone who had something right between Cancer and Leo, that would be completing these 2 squares you have. Well, it's 1 square, but there's like multiple aspects. There's red lines that are creating a triangle. And actually, I think my moon is right here, and when we put ours together, there is a grand cross, like a square with an X through it, which is interesting. Trying to see. Oh, that was the other thing. So this is Pallas Athena, and she is like that creator goddess of war. And it's not quite near this line, but it's interesting because it seems like she plays an important role. I don't know if it's my intuition or if it's the placement, because it was in an important place in Rubens' chart. Yeah, and I think one of the really neat things in Jessie's chart is Chiron is opposite Mercury, and Mercury is opposite the moon, and Mercury and Chiron are conjunct or together. So that feels like a lot of part of like your career and your communication has to do with like that intuitive healing, even if it's not like you don't have to dress up like a wizard, but you know, even in like your holistic coaching, that feels really like, and with the red, that meaning it's like less favorable, more challenging. So it's like if you ignore the fact that you have like the medicine from the wounds, like to alchemize it, or if you ignore your intuition, and if you don't speak your truth of those things, I think that's when there would be more challenges.
Are you saying, to clarify that, so you're saying like anytime I do not follow, like, because based on this chart, my intuitive ability is strong, that anytime I don't follow that, it can bite me hard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like threaten you, but I think like the way to work with the less favorable lines, those red lines, is to see how to work with them. So I guess I don't know if it will bite you hard, but it will be just more challenges will present themselves. And
yeah. That resonates so much, because I was talking about this with friends lately about this idea of like when someone asks you like, what do you do? And and lately I've just been in, because I do such different things there, and I've noticed that anytime I've tried to navigate my life in a way where I was like, this is who I am, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, anytime I've like forced that, it would blow up all in my face. And the last year or 2 years, really the last year and a half, I would say, the biggest thing that I've been trying to cultivate, at least career wise, but also in my life in general, is like, I am no longer going to decide who I am. I am going to allow the universe to tell me what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing. And just follow gut instinct in relationship to that, versus like, no, Jesse, you're supposed to be this. And then, because like I said, every time I would do that, it would not go down well. So I totally resonate with that.
Yeah. You also have your sun opposite Pluto, so that could play into it too. Like when the moon is opposite the sun, it's a full moon, and when the moon is full, that's not what you have. But when the moon is full, it's like intense, right? And you can't ignore it. Even the darkness is lit up. But so similar thing. The moon is shining like directly on Pluto in your chart, and also your career. The MC is not necessarily your career, but like the legacy you're creating to leave behind in this world. So those are conjunct, and we did talk about that last time I looked at your chart a little bit. But so it's almost like if you ignore that, if you ignore that your career has to do with like death and rebirth and creating change, that will also be kind of challenging, because your sun is like shining directly at it across, like, hello, this is really obvious. I mean, that's sort of like a judgmental way to say it, but like that's kind of what the oppositions are showing us. Like, I'm trying to think of an analogy in life, but yeah, it's like your tire looks low and you want to ignore it. It's like, okay, you know what happens when you ignore that your tire is low. I'm not saying the chart is saying your tire is low. I'm saying when something is so obvious and you ignore it, we all know what's going to happen. Does that make sense a little bit? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll go back to,
Oh no, sorry, Keira. I was so curious I know you're going back to like me and Jessies together. I'm so curious about our challenges. I'm always like, I want to better, So
yeah. for sure.
Let's see
Some
what
of
we
it-
suck at, Jesse.
Hey, there's a few things.
Some of it, like, I don't have it all memorized. I still look at my chart and research into it because this seems like a never-ending subject. But so some things I would say we could research, or you could research later, but we will look and see. So the red lines, the most obvious one that I'm seeing is straight across this chart. So who's first? So Jessie's Venus is opposite Ruben's Mars. So there might be some kind of like clash of like the yin and yang a little bit. Like when Jessie wants to be the still ass tree, Ruben wants to like go do a HIIT workout.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That's so true.
So true. So true.
So just embrace it. Just embrace it.
Most of the time we fall into disagreements is when one is acting opposite of the other. Like if whether I'm trying to be chill or he's trying to be chill, the other person is usually the one who's like, nah, we gotta go right now. And it's like,
yeah.
But
and that's like Mars and Venus are like super good archetypes of yin and yang because they're both close to the earth. They're both personal planets. Like they relate to us on a personal level, where the further planets can be more of like a generational thing. So I could see, anytime one of you is kind of yang, the other one might be yin, or maybe there's ways to, like, let's see. So is there any other aspects to Jessie's Venus? Not really. But there is a favorable line. So there's a sextile between, it's hard to read exactly. I don't have the whole legend for these, but it could be Ruben's Mars sextile Jessie's Uranus or Pallas Athena. Yeah, I'm not gonna make an assumption on that because I'm not sure if I'm reading it right based on degrees because it's kind of hard to read. But let's see other challenges. Okay, so Ruben's Chiron, which is the wounded healer, is square Jessie's Saturn. So Saturn is Chronos, so he's like the lord of time. Saturn, this is interesting. So Chiron is like, could be easily triggered, and he's in a water element, so sensitive or intuitive. Oops. Headphones fell out. It's also like the nurturer and the mother, and Saturn will like knock you on your ass if you're not in integrity. So that feels like a challenging aspect. So I'm trying to think of like a situation or an example, and that's in Aries too. So fiery Saturn could trigger Ruben's watery, wounded, sensitive side.
Perfect. Jesse's just stabbing my soul sometimes, I guess.
Do I trigger you, Ruben? Do I ever trigger you?
You triggered me on Fridays.
I trigger Ruben a lot. I'm not even gonna lie.
Yeah, I can see that aspect would be like, especially so Saturn in a fire sign. Yeah, could. So let's see what would be like. So for Ruben, I might say, just know it's not personal. It's like he's just in that fiery state.
Right.
And for Jessie, I'd say like, dude, like just chill a little bit. And then let's see what other. So Saturn is playing an interesting role because there's these other lines coming from Saturn too. Jessie's Saturn to Ruben's Saturn and Neptune. So Saturn squares off. So there might be times when you guys are like not quite agreeing on the structure or the timing, and like maybe Ruben is like stubborn because it's an earth element over here in Capricorn.
Oh yeah, stubborn. I'm a stubborn goat for sure.
Yeah. And then Jessie would be maybe not so stubborn, but like in like the structure or the timing. I don't know. This just like guesses. And then in terms, are we gonna say something? Okay, in terms of Neptune and Saturn. So Ruben's Neptune and Jessie's Saturn. I guess that could also be like, so Ruben, you have like these two things that seem like contrasting sort of. Neptune is like the creative, the imaginative, the visionary. And so that trying to be grounded, like maybe trying to create these like inspiring new structures is getting a little bit like hung up possibly, or like there can be this kind of catch between you two of maybe Jessie's version of structure or integrity isn't noticing or isn't in harmonious flow with that. Does that make sense?
Wait, what exactly am I not in harmonious flow with?
With his like creative, imaginative vision. I don't know. It also.
Do you feel that way?
I mean, I'm trying to think. That's what I'm thinking, like through, like what could that have been? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, I'll definitely say, even to the last point, and maybe this relates, is like I could be superimposing on like what I could be superimposing on what I think should happen and when. And I do not take into considerations Ruben's timeline at all. And I'll just like, yo, we need to do this now, or this needs to happen at this point. And Ruben's like, where do you want me to pull this out of? I'm like, like just gotta figure it out, bro.
Yeah. And like maybe partly because Ruben has Saturn and Neptune kind of conjunct. So it's almost like Ruben, your version of structure, even though it's in Capricorn, is like maybe you're more resourceful or creative and like you have a grounded structure, but maybe you are able to like, okay, maybe Jessie just like threw this thing at me and maybe it didn't seem like it could work, but I can make it work because Neptune is beside my Saturn. Not giving Jessie permission to abuse that, but
Exactly. No, that does happen. There are times where I'm like, should I let him have this one or no? And it's like, okay, this time, yeah. And there's been times where I'm like, I'm not letting him have this one this time. Can't make him get too comfortable, you know?
Yeah.
I will say no to Jessie and go and play video games, even though I know I have to do something. I'll be like, yeah, I love you, Jessie.
I love how this is like therapy, astrotherapy.
This is good though. It's good.
This is good therapy.
Yeah.
I mean, Ruben and I's relationship is awesome. This is all just all just gravy.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like every human is at a different place, and so your whole chart could show up as challenge, or it could show up as like your magic, or like your mindset, how you look at life. Like you could look at this like a frustrating labyrinth that you don't even want to get into, but I don't get the impression that that's how you guys look at life, right? For you, it's more like, oh, this is so interesting. How can we like get creative? And like you guys wanted to know. Other people, you could say, hey, do you want to like look at the unfavorable aspects? And they'd be like, no, don't even talk about it. Those are the
first places I go, because I'm like, all right, we need to dig deep, Jessie. We need to figure this shit out so that we can move forward and get better.
Yeah.
So then we also have Jessie's Chiron. I have to make sure. Yeah, Jessie's Chiron is square Ruben's Mercury. So it's possible that what you say, Ruben, could be like the trigger for Jessie's wounds in Libra, which I don't know if perhaps the trigger. I love your facial
if you're watching, if you're listening, the facial expressions Jessie and I just made were great.
I missed the first 3 seconds, darn it.
I would say I mean, sometimes sometimes, I mean, sometimes Ruben can say some shit where I'll be like, man, fuck that guy. I'm not even gonna lie, bro. Sometimes I say some shit and I'm like, man, I can't stand this dude, but I love him. So it's like, whatever.
For example, that.
Nah, that's good. It's offline.
I'm sorry. Look, I'll be stabbing your soul just like you be stabbing my soul. It's all good.
Absolutely. It's good. It's good.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at, so this is in Libra. So Libra is like balance. It's an air sign. So I'm trying to think. I mean, everything, I'm a Libra sun. So for me, it's like, isn't life about balance? Not necessarily symmetry, but like moving towards balance. And sometimes that's like short micro bursts, and sometimes that's like one decade this way, one decade that way. But it's interesting because these like the two squares to Chiron that you each have to each other, like basically you can just look at how can we bring that into balance. Like for Jessie, it's like either turn down your fire, or Ruben like know that he's fiery in some ways and like don't take it personal. And in this one it would be like don't take personal like whatever comes out of his mouth. I'm not sure like the ways that like not saying that, because this isn't fire, it's just it's somehow Mercury squares Chiron. So even if it's like sounds like the kindest thing, it's somehow triggering possibly your wounds. But the more we are aware of anything, the more we can kind of zoom out and like, oh, like why did that arrow like go through my armor into my heart? Like why didn't my armor stop that? What's the weakness that let that in? And that's, I mean, ultimately we learn in relationships, but I think we learn a lot more when we look at what's our personal trigger, and doesn't matter who did it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but and then let's see. I'll show you guys how I play in, because I'm your new best friend.
Yes. Oh.
New best friend. So the fact that I was drawn to you, Jessie, because of the centaur thing was interesting. We kind of saw this before, but my Mercury is conjunct your Chiron. So it was like, yeah, my messenger god of communication makes sense that I had to talk to you about the centaur thing, because Chiron is a centaur. And then your moon is conjunct my Pluto. So I don't know, I feel like Pluto is a common thread between the three of us, and maybe your listeners too, like a willingness to change and to have those ego deaths and to like be reborn, and an intuitiveness. And then you can see like this red square with a cross across the corners. So this isn't exactly on the line of Cancer and Leo, but because my moon is here, that's what's creating these aspect lines that on your chart, Jessie, were just the red triangle, just on the one left side of the chart. And then me showing up creates like, yeah, it could also be like, whoa, this is a lot of red lines. That doesn't look very favorable. But I think it's also like, I don't know, it feels like the next level of a video game. Like just blue lines seems kind of just like how I cope with my red lines. Like
expert level.
blue ones are too easy.
So what would be some of our opportunities here?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot. So there's like you're on the inside, yeah. So your communication and my death and rebirth, your sun, so like how you shine in the world, and my structures. And this, so what they say in astrology is no aspect is a bad aspect. So I would say the blue lines are almost like good luck, and the red lines are like this happens, and sometimes it's a challenge, but it's also like a big part of your life, if that makes sense. Like if there's a line, it means something. Not red lines are bad, blue lines are good.
Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Your sun, no wait, my sun is trine your Chiron. So that, no, your Venus. So maybe there's something there of like, we just relate on this easeful level, and they're both in air, and I have a grand air trine. So it's not Mercury, but it's like chatty, like having the conversations and enjoying them. I know it's not, I also have Mercury in Libra. Yeah, what other challenges? Uranus. Sometimes it's hard to read all the different things. So is that me or you? Me, okay. Your Uranus square my true node. That would be like, you would kind of shock me with the lightning of like, zing, like this is where your soul's supposed to go, Keira. And you know, like in the less favorable way, sometimes the lightning when you don't want it or when you don't expect it is shocking. And sometimes it could be like just like enlightenment, like enlightening, like telepathy or communication. I know it's not Mercury, but that connection, which is interesting. Yeah, and then let's see, Ruben and I. Also, I ran your lines. I put your chart, Jessie, with AOC. It's favorable. So that's like, maybe one day she'll fund your dream project that you have.
There we go.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, who's this? Ruben on the inside. I'm on the outside.
You guys have a crazy ass looking chart right now.
Why it's so much to the right? Like it's so to the right of the clock.
Yeah, there's a meaning to that, but I don't know it offhand. But also, so this is the first house, but we rotate at 180 degrees. So my chart doesn't only exist on this side, but when I'm turned so that both of our Capricorns slices of the pie are in the same place, that's how it looks. So my ascendant is near your Mercury, which makes sense. So like we're on a podcast together, like how I show up in the world relates easily and connects easily with your communication. And then also your Mercury is trine my Mars and Venus. So it's sort of like there's also this favorable balance to like my yin and yang, which are together over here, like the goddess of like abundance and pleasure and harmony, and then the god of like action and fierceness, like all those things combine favorably with your communication. So all those things sound like good reasons to be on a podcast together. And then let's just scan around. Yeah, your Venus conjunct my Jupiter, so that's interesting. That's just like they're both, what's the word, like benefic planets, like benevolent planets. So whereas like Mars and Saturn and Pluto and have like some shit that can come up, but these, it just feels like, yeah, that feels easy. And they're both in Aquarius, which is like the thinker, the dreamer, like let's create a new world, and it's ruled by Uranus, which you know a little bit about. So there could be like this harmonious spiritual thing that feels like fun and beautiful, and also because it's in Aquarius, it's like, and like the sparks of ideas just flow. maybe. So
Wow.
yeah, so that's an idea of.
Can we see, because I remember you were also talking about how like the different houses of things and how they show up. And can you remind us about the importance of the 12th house? Because isn't that like
Yeah.
your full coming or whatever it was?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll go back to just a single chart. So every house has kind of its meaning or its how it shows up, and you could say like the hero's journey or the cycle of life, and that could be like from birth to death. It can also be like little chunks of time, like Ruben, if you're changing every year, this could be like an annual kind of change. The first house is like your identity, who you are, and then second house is like possessions and wealth and like existing, and then communication is in the third house. Excuse me, comfort zone. Have them all noted on my wall. Fourth house is like your home. Fifth house is creativity and like childbirth, even like any kind of creation. Sixth house is sort of like personal, like self mastery and duty and taking care of yourself. Seventh house is relationship. So the below the horizon line is all about yourself, inner stuff, and the above the line is you in the world or your interactions with the world. So it's interesting you have this polarity because you have a lot of stuff going on in the first house, which is like just you have like the beginning of your existence in yourself in the world, and then also all the stuff going on in the existence in relationships outside of yourself. But just to work around to all the way to the 12th house, the 8th house, sometimes they say is like the house of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's where your true note is. So that's where your soul's headed.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. Oh no. Well, it's also like shadow work, other people's wealth. I would say it's kind of like, how did I come up with? It's sort of like intimacy in the world, in a way. Ninth house is travel and learning and teaching. 10th house is sort of career and purpose, achievement, like goals. 11th house is community in one short word. And then the 12th house is like your deep inner self and your self mastery. And the 12th house sometimes can be your own shadow and like your own blind spot, and it doesn't have to be. So, but it sometimes can be like the last thing that's revealed to you or the last lesson you learn. And that's part of why I left some of these other like less important aspects or asteroids in the chart. So this is Persephone. So that's the only thing that came up that I really know much about that's in your 12th house, and it's opposite Mars, which is interesting because that's another kind of yin and yang thing. So it's not drawing a line because Persephone is not like a big aspect in most charts, but I always find like, hey, if that's intriguing, we should look into it. So Persephone also has some wounds. I'm really interested in her. She just because I've looked into it in my chart, but she was like kidnapped by Pluto and taken to the underworld. So first she was sort of this unwilling victim, and then there's many versions of the myths and the stories, but the one I like, the empowering one, is she like took that and alchemized it into like, well, fine then, I'll be the goddess of the underworld.
I know that story.
Yeah. And so then, like personally, or you know the myth, or you
No,
know
I know
it,
the
like,
myth. I know the myth. Yeah,
okay.
I'm familiar with that one. That
Well,
version.
you're gonna have to familiarize yourself with it in your life. Yeah,
Okay.
but so like the opposition of Mars just feels like it is sort of like this your yin and your yang, and like maybe there's like this feminine part of you that could feel kind of like left in the shadows, left in the unknown, but also it's like, yeah, this is also part of where your mastery is. So like not letting the feminine gifts you have become ignored. So like let that part of you become the goddess of the underworld instead of like her being so ignored that she stays a victim. You know, does that make sense?
A little bit. I'm trying to think of like how I would like push down my feminine versus my masculine.
Yeah. It could also show up in like a time in your life or a relationship, or when this, okay, so this is a whole other thing we didn't talk about. When I turn on the transits, the green planets outside. Oh, this is super interesting. So you have like Mars transiting Mars opposite natal Mars. So you might be having like something to do with your masculinity or like your action taking feeling more potent these days. And then
100%.
Yeah. And then because he just has passed Persephone, there might be something of like, I don't know, like the story that comes up in my mind, doesn't have to be your story, but the story that comes up in my mind is sometimes when I'm so in my masculine, or when I witness, for example, in my parents or people, it's like sometimes the feminine is like, what about me?
Right.
So maybe there's like that kind of balance to bring, like, yeah, do all the actionable things, and how does your, maybe it's your body or your mind or your spirit, how does that need some balance from the yin, you know? Like in a yoga class, even a power flow, personally I would say still do shavasana. Like don't ignore, you know, like that's a metaphor, but it's like,
I'm definitely the type to always skip shavasana. I was like, I'm not gonna lay here for 10 minutes. So I get it. I gotta do the shavasana.
Yeah. Literally and metaphorically.
Got it. Okay.
Or like don't stay up working all night. Or if you do, maybe there's like 3 days at the end of it that you know, rest.
Got it.
Yeah. So do you guys have any other questions or things you want to?
Well, yeah. So like what I wanted to know was that in our own, when we look at our combined charts, I was really curious.
The 12th house?
As the 12th house, or really any house that seems particularly like astounding.
Let's see.
Jessie, the way you're talking about it is
Ruben
like
and Ruben.
Oh, that works out.
I just clicked on a link.
You
Okay.
just clicked on and got ClickFunnels.
I don't want that.
This is not an advertisement for ClickFunnels.
This is not
Jessie is curious. Be like, are we gonna do a business together, or are we gonna die together? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, if there's anything particularly outstanding in any of the houses.
Yeah. Well, okay. I would just say, like, because Ruben has a stellium in Capricorn, for you, Jessie, that's interesting because that's your 12th house.
Oh.
So, like, all these things about all the stuff goes on for him for relationships. It's all maybe like you can learn from it, or you naturally maybe don't live the same way, but I mean, I haven't looked at synastry charts so much in terms of houses, but
we're doing it live.
Yeah, we're doing it live. And then the other thing I'm curious about, but I don't know if it exists, is to see how this is 7th house and 12th house. So they've matched the signs, but I would be curious to match the houses and just see what do you guys both have. So what do you have in your 7th house? Nothing, but it's opposite these things. Yeah, so there could be like a polarity thing. Yeah, I don't know if I want to read like too much into it because this is like so off the cuff, and I'm like, I could be off on that, but first house. Well, we can look at like your major, so like with the aspecting lines, trying to think. So your Mercury Jessie is in the 4th house, which is like could be more private, or it could be more about your home life. Whereas Rubens is in his 7th house, which is about relating. Yeah, I find it a little bit harder to compare houses, but if you have a different question, like
no, I mean this has been awesome. I was just throwing it out there. I don't know how these work, but I mean I think you've given Ruben and I a lot to take in and to ponder on with each other, because I think a lot of what you brought up definitely exists in our relationship, the beautiful things and the challenging things as well. And so we get to explore those things and see how we can amplify, optimize. So yeah, thanks so much that was super fun. Thanks so much for showing us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for being willing participants.
Yeah,
it's like guinea pigs.
For being born.
Absolutely. That was fun.
Any final?
Yeah, and then as we close out, I'd love for you to share where people, if they want to have an astrology session with you or any of the things you do, where they can find you, how they can connect with you, if you could just let the people know.
Yeah, sure. So my website is KeiraBurgess.com, so KeiraBurgess, and on there you can go to readings and get astrology reading books or Akashic Records or tarot or oracle card. And like I said, I am putting together an astrology course for like basic how to understand that overwhelming graph that might not make sense to beginners. And then my Instagram is Keira_Burgess. So that's how you can find me. Feel free to reach out if you have more questions.
Absolutely. And all those things are going to be in the show notes as well. So you could just scroll down and check it out. Thanks to our good friend, Ruben, who does that for all of us. So yeah, Keira, thanks so much for coming on. This was a dope conversation. Thanks so much for the reading. That was awesome. And we look forward to have you back on, because I definitely want to talk Akashic Records and readings and all the cool shit you do. So this will be a first of many episodes. We will definitely have you back for more.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Nice to meet you, Ruben. Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Peace.